What's going on, Star Wars fans?
Hello there.
We are here with another episode of Star Wars Jedi Chat. I am very pleased to welcome John Morton. How are you?
Hey, this is the way.
There you go. I'm so excited that you're able to stop by and come on here with us
It's
and
good
chat.
to be here in Nashville. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. It should be a good time. We got the ICCC convention this weekend, and that's what you're in here for. So, how have you been?
Been good. It's always good to get out on the road. Been avoiding and dodging the hurricanes. I hope that continues, and really praying for the people in North Carolina especially.
Yeah, they really got hit pretty hard, which from being in Maryland so long, we always get the rain and some of those hurricanes quite a bit. So
yeah,
and I know
I've lived through quite a few of them.
Yeah, and you're in Annapolis there, right? So
correct.
Again, that water comes up into the
if it's passing to the west of us, the cyclone comes in, pushes the water up, and it can get pretty nasty.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. So let's chat Star Wars.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
When you got into it, obviously this was for Empire Strikes Back, which is I think pretty cool. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. I mean, for the most part, Star Wars fans consider that the best Star Wars movie that's out there.
Well, I think the talent in actually putting it together and the constraints that George was working under, constraints were all sort of put the creative side for him in balance. But he had Lee Brackett and Larry Kasdan to put together a fabulous script.
Yeah,
that was a little deeper than I think he himself had intended. Also, there were three directors that were working that shoot. Irving Kershner, who was the director of record. One of the executive producers, Gary Kurtz, who people tend to forget, was very much of a co-equal with George in putting this together. And he came and brought his own perspective because he was a Marine Corps combat cameraman in Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
And then there was George himself. So my own experience with Empire Strikes Back, I worked for 4 weeks, I was directed by all three of these guys in different capacities. So, in a creative sense, there was a lot of juice that was coming from a different, perspective that all sort of balanced out. The other thing is George had a lot more money to play with. But nevertheless, he was in a position where he still had to have Alan Laddie back at the studio arguing for more money that was needed. And he had to, weigh the dynamics of director, auteur, and studio very carefully. With Empire Strikes Back, there were a lot of delays because of the technical challenges that were there. And so in my case, I was only expecting to do 2 days' work. I was on a daily rate for 2 days. I ended up working for 4 weeks.
Wow.
So, and that was... It seemed to be that was because of the scheduling issues that things had gotten stacked up and they were running behind because some of the shots that they were trying to put together. I mean, for example, the stuff that I did as Boba Fett in the freezing chamber, causing great technical challenges. Same thing with the blue screen stuff that we were doing in the Battle of Hoth. So I saw how things weren't working smoothly. It was just taking time. So I feel very strongly about, the kind of matrix of issues that were all kind of together in Empire Strikes Back that weren't necessarily present in the other films. In the case of A New Hope, the first one, well, it was George was finding his way. And he wasn't necessarily getting sympathetic responses from his British technicians. So the morale in the film there was a little begrudging, oh, well, I'm only doing this for the money kind of stuff, and this is ridiculous. In the case of Empire Strikes Back, everybody got it, and so the morale was extremely high. When you move forward to Return of the Jedi, um, George had much more control. Um, but on the other hand, it kind of went in directions without somebody saying, hey, in this particular case, the emperor doesn't have any clothes. Nobody said that. And so when you go forward to the prequels, George had such control that there was nobody there to say anything about, I think you need to modulate this a little bit, So the dynamics, if you see what I'm saying,
Absolutely.
the dynamics all worked in the film's favor with The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
In addition to the creative talent that was present in the way that the script was put, life was put into the script. George's background was really as an editor. That's how he as a filmmaker. That's how he sort of saw things. And as we all know, he was selling the idea of Star Wars on the basis of the storyboards, and his genius was the way that he brought people of talent, whatever it may be, whether it was in the props department or in the case of Ralph McQuarrie bringing these visions from NASA. Oh yeah, that works. Um, yeah, I mean George is an amazing filmmaker because he made the collaborative nature of the film business into something that really worked for him with this amazing mythic story that he came up with. I mean, it really is an amazing experience when you think of the whole thing of Star Wars, which you're obviously a part of.
Yeah, the length that it is still so popular
Yeah,
today.
yeah,
All these people coming to the convention along with yourself. All the new stuff that's coming out, even though it is some of this Disney stuff. Obviously, George created something big enough and cool enough
yeah,
to continue for almost 50 years.
yeah,
With
yeah.
a New Hope in 27 will be 50 years. It's
It's
crazy.
incredible when you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. When now, even though A New Hope had come out, did you realize how big that possibly Empire or Return of the Jedi or how big Star Wars could get?
No, I have to be honest. Remember, I was based in London, and although I did come back in September, October in '77 to the United States, I came back because I had my first one of my first film scripts that I was trying to move in Los Angeles. I had an agent that brought me over there, and where I was staying in New York, the wife of this friend of mine said, "Hey, have you seen Star Wars?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Yeah, you ought to go see it." And it was playing just down the street on 86th Street on the Upper East Side. And so that was kind of my introduction. Although socially, I was in the same orbit as Anthony Daniels. And
Okay.
I remember meeting him after I'd come back from doing A Bridge Too Far. And we were at a cocktail party, and he was telling me that he was in this thing called Star Wars. And I said, "Oh yeah, I know about this film." My friend Anthony Forrest, who I'd just done a film with, Bridge Too Far, had been in Tunisia, and uh, and I remember Anthony Daniels saying, "I have no idea what this thing is going to be. It's kind of a joke." Um, he wasn't the kind of person that he is now. He was very shy and approachable, and we had a good conversation. So, you know, in England, people didn't really get it. Now, the young kids that went to see the film in England when it came out, and I'm not sure I remember when that was, if it was in May in '77 or if it was later. not all the premieres coincide
Right. Yeah.
between.
Sometimes there's a couple months or a
Yeah,
couple
and it
weeks
could
apart.
be,
Yeah.
it opens in England first before it comes to America, but I just don't remember the order of things. But I don't remember it having any kind of a holy smoke
Yeah.
experience. However, when I got to the set in, I guess it was March of '79 to do Empire Strikes Back, well, by that time everybody was on board, and they were all sort of, everybody was claiming a story or a legacy in this. I remember a lot of the technicians that were in the props department and special effects were very eager to share their story that they had worked with Stanley Kubrick on 2001 at Elstree, and saying, well, of course, that's why George is producing this film here at Elstree's, because this is, he was drawing on all of our creative abilities from Stanley Kubrick. And I'm sure there's a lot of truth in that.
Right.
Which gets back to my point of George having the prescience to, bring people that can bring something to the table for him in, and letting him roll with it. Yeah, that's a long way to answer your question. It's in two parts. Star Wars: A New Hope in England didn't, at least for adults, didn't have, I don't think, a major impact. But by the time of Empire Strikes Back, everybody got it.
Yeah. The ball was rolling, and
Oh
that,
yeah.
that snowball,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that snowball on Hoth was getting bigger and bigger,
Yeah.
so to speak. How was back then? How was it working with Mark?
Oh, he was such a super guy.
Yeah.
He and I were at that time were very close, um, because our schedules were the same, and so I had lunch with him probably every day for 4 weeks. And one of the reasons that we developed this closeness was that we both discovered that our fathers were World War II destroyermen in the Navy.
Oh wow.
And he grew up as a Navy junior, as did I. And so we had that common experience and bond. And in the Navy, anybody that was in destroyers or small ships, I was in the Navy, and my daughter served on a destroyer. It's small is beautiful. Service on a destroyer is like being on a Coast Guard cutter. It's a different culture than most of the rest of the Navy, that can be bureaucratic even at sea. Anyway, Mark and I shared that and talked a lot about our dads, and I think he grew to trust me because I was not part of the Hollywood contingent that came out, because really all the actors that were there, with the exception of the big three and so forth, were British Actors Equity, London based, and so we were kind of we weren't part of the gamesmanship of who's on first.
Right.
So Mark was very open and forthcoming, and yeah, no, he was a great guy. And I unfortunately I only saw him once since then at Celebration 6 in Orlando,
Okay.
and yeah, it was in 2012. And we chatted for a little bit, but I he didn't respond to, like, hey John, great to see you. It was like, yeah. But what do you expect? I
Right.
mean, he's met tens of thousands of people, since those days.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually at that Star Wars celebration.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what was there a challenging part for what you did on that? Was there something more challenging than the other, or you'd already been acting
Yeah.
obviously?
No, it was pretty straightforward. Yeah. Now, yeah, you might say, well, what about when you were stepped on by the AT-AT? Well, actually, that happened before I got there. It was a Norwegian extra that was Dak in the scenes that they shot, the exterior scenes in Finza, and that were legendarily cold. I mean, there was a blizzard when they were filming this thing. I mean, the cameras freezed up.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of discussion about that when they came back and started the interior shots at Elstree. Um,
So you never did any of the outdoor stuff?
no.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, but that would be the nature of your question. Now, I had challenging issues in Superman 2
Right.
when I was in the interior of the lunar module, and that got crushed. And that was a little hairy.
Yeah.
There was one shot. And
Wow.
yeah. And the instrument that crushed it was the forks of a forklift,
Oh, okay.
kind of banging
Right.
down on the thing. And yeah, and I remember that very well.
Oh,
And
I
then
bet.
the squibs going off. So yeah, that crash scene on that one, that was a challenge.
Yeah.
But I'd been through all that kind of stuff before in A Bridge Too Far and the combat scenes
Okay.
that we did in that film. So yeah, so
Uh,
stunts or near stunts were things that I was pretty familiar with.
Right. Right. Well, that's
Yeah,
interesting though that I didn't realize that you weren't out on the set
yeah,
outside. It
no,
was just
no, that
inside or
was
in the studio, which
yeah.
is obviously probably pretty cool. You know, you weren't out there freezing in the blizzard.
I don't think. I mean, yeah, I remember Peter Mayhew talking to me about that, and it wasn't fun for them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd met him a couple times, and he was pretty cool guy
yeah,
to talk to, and obviously had some fun stories and stuff as
yeah,
well. I think it's pretty neat though for yourself because the line you have in the movie, even though you weren't in it that long, has become such a big line
yeah.
in Star Wars, which
Well,
is
the same one with the scene I did for Jeremy as Boba Fett. He's no good to me dead.
right.
Yeah, so those two lines actually have done me quite well.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that I have a theory on that line. Um, the the fans that really come wide-eyed to meet me at conventions and say things like, "Oh, I'm so glad to meet you. You know, Dak has always been my favorite role, and my favorite this, that, and the other." And you sort of think, yeah. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that the real Dak fans, men, were the second sons.
Okay.
Now think about it. Okay, you're there with your big brother,
Right.
and you're jacked up on Star Wars, and Big Brother says, "Hey, Johnny, let's go out and let's play Star Wars, and I'll be Luke and you be Dak."
Right.
It's the throwaway. And when I finally met Jonas Sotomo,
Hmm.
the guy that took over for Chewbacca, um, my booking agent brought me over to introduce me, and his eyes got wide, and he said, "I can't believe, oh, Dak." And I went, "Oh my gosh!" And he hit me with his fanboy stuff, and I said, "Jonas, I mean, I should be the fanboy here. I mean, you're Chewbacca here." And he said, "No, no, 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 Dak. Dak is my favorite. I mean, your line right now, I feel I can take on the Empire all by myself is so wonderful and idealistic, and I love it." And I said, "Tell me, do you have an older brother?" And he said, "Yeah. Why do you ask?" And I said, "Well, here's my theory." He said, "Well, yeah, that's the way it worked." And my older brother was always Luke, and I got to be Dak.
We've talked about this in some of the other episodes. I had Michonne on here who played Aura Singh,
Mm-hmm.
and she's in it for probably not even 30 seconds standing up on a hill, but she's become such a huge bounty hunter. And same with Boba Fett,
Mm-hmm.
as we all know. He had a little bit of
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
and he's become a huge character.
yeah. Well, it's the strength of the whole of Star Wars that not just the young people, the children, but when people get into it at whatever age, um, I mean, this is the magic of what George did. I mean, those of you that might want to meditate on this a little bit. will appreciate that George was very influenced by Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell was a Jungian writer, academic, and many of you out there probably know who this guy is, but for those of you that don't, he wrote this book back in the 40s, I think it was, called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which my wife actually bought for me right before I did Star Wars, way back in the 70s. And I read it, and I didn't really make the connection right away. But subsequently, I realized that, hey, wait a second. What George was trying to do with his story is come up with a mythos that was, kind of the motif going through all the great religions and mythologies in the world. And he, boiled it down to the essence of the hero's journey. And that's what George took as he was putting together his notion for Star Wars. Well, I digress on this for a little bit to say that whether we realize it or not, um, it was so effective that, this has become the mythos that we all share, whether we use the term or not. To give you an interesting example, the third largest religion in the United Kingdom is the Church of the Jedi. And there's I don't know what the statistics are, but I remember reading this in the Daily Telegraph, which is a newspaper of record, that there's thousands of weddings that are performed in England these days in the church by the Church of the Jedi. So what's that all about?
Yeah.
And notwithstanding the Church of England or Islam, which is big in the UK, but the number 3 religion in terms of membership, people identifying the Church of the Jedi. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, it really has become such a huge part of culture,
Yeah.
nowadays, which is insane. It's just so big. We've talked about that on this show as well with, all the just little skits that,
Yeah.
on the Big Bang Theory or,
Yep.
some of the other cartoons where they talk about Darth Vader or something with Star Wars and stuff like that, and they'll maybe reference some other things as well. But most of the time it's a Star Wars reference
Yeah.
that these people are referencing to
Still.
these shows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
I love the way
crazy.
since The Mandalorian, this is the way, become a successor to May the Force be with you.
Yeah, it's become
pretty cool.
huge. Yeah, they did a great job, I think, and I think Dave Filoni has done a good job bringing and continuing George's focus on this.
Well, when he turned the thing over back just after Essen, Celebration Europe 2, he had a good core of people that was it was called in those days the Lucasfilm Story Group. And that was Pablo Hidalgo, Leland Chee, to name 2, who were in that. And why I was kind of aware of this was in the early teens, I was blogging a lot for StarWars.com.
Oh, cool.
So if anybody's interested in seeing what the writings were that I did about 10, 15 pieces that are still up there on StarWars.com. And so I interacted with these guys quite a lot and did a piece on the Essen convention. And I'm trying to remember my contact there was, I knew Pablo pretty well and his wife, Kristen. And they were there and then Filoni showed up. He was there in Essen. But that was intended to be the entity that was going to bring forward Lucas's material and husband it, if you will,
Right.
Responsibly. And all of these people were Star Wars fans. From childhood.
Yeah.
So it was in their, in their marrow. Now, of course, that changed, obviously, when the kind of objective impact of, Disney and the corporation kind of got involved, and so a little bit of that has kind of gotten mixed. But in many ways, all of this is, to your point about it still being relevant today. For good or bad, we have all these discussions about, the, laptop warriors and what have you, everybody complaining about this, that, and the other, and whatever. It really is like having to deal with, the heresies and unorthodoxies in any religious organization. I mean, it's extraordinary. I don't know if the same thing applies to Power Rangers
Right.
or Star Trek. It probably does, but I don't think to the degree it does with Star Wars.
No, no, I
Um,
think Star Wars is just so big
yeah, and that's
nowadays.
because the whole Star Wars um, brand is embedded itself in anybody that's familiar with it, and it matters.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
some people are Baptists, some people are Roman Catholics.
Yeah.
So you know,
Yeah. Well,
and
and I think that's part of what George had in mind was that you have the good, you have the evil,
yeah,
and there's that yin and yang, and just everything that's all about that is part of life, and everything that you see in some of these in movies is the interaction, whether it's a romantic interaction or a friendly
yeah,
interaction or whatever, but it is part of life, and I think it's just cool that he was able to bring these type of characters
yeah,
to life and still have a really cool story behind them.
yeah. Well, it's what's remarkable. It's the 20th century, as I say, touchstone. Whereas, I'm half English. My mother was a war bride, and I remember growing up, becoming aware. Mind you, I had the I don't know, the self identification as an American. I was the Yank
Right.
cousin. All the rest of these people, their reference points, were to something like, Rome and Greece. I mean, they were reading the classics or Shakespeare, right?
Right.
Those were touchstones for the Brits. I don't know. We as Americans have different touchstones. Well, I mean, when I was growing up, they were the westerns,
Right.
and some people were into Gunsmoke, and some people were into Have Gun Will Travel, and and there were reference points that everybody shared. Because there were only three networks in the
Right.
'50s when I was growing up. Um, Today, nobody's going to be saying, "Oh, well, I'm into Maverick or Bonanza or what have
Right.
you." They're going to say, "Oh no, man, I'm into Boba Fett," or you know, Luke Skywalker.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any other people that you've stayed in touch with
uh,
throughout the years?
well, only through the conventions. Billy D. Williams being one of them.
Okay.
I can't say that we're terrifically close, but we did have time on set when I did those 2 days as Boba Fett. And I've run into him frequently in conventions, and we usually have a time to sit down and say hi and
Right.
so forth. I was pretty close to Kenny,
Hmm.
and obviously Jeremy and I were very close.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but then there were others. I mean, the guys that are all coming here, like Garrick Hagan, who was Biggs Darklighter, uh, Tim Tim Rose, who was Admiral Akbar, among others. Um, Anthony Forrest, who was one of the stormtroopers. So yeah, what's really nice about these conventions is it enables us old guys and gals, to get together and hang out and reminisce on the old days.
Yeah. That's neat.
So in that respect, we stay in touch. I guess in terms of emails and all and what have you. I mean, Garrick is somebody that I connect with a lot. Another guy named Jack McKenzie, who was one of the Star Wars officers or rebel officers. I'm trying to remember his character in Empire Strikes Back. He and John Ratzenberger, for example. John was a good friend of mine,
Oh, okay.
and I interviewed him actually for StarWars.com. So I mean, there are those sort of haphazard things. The writer that introduced you and me, Jimmy Lucino, I'm in touch with him a lot, only by virtue of the fact that he and I are in the same town.
Right.
And he started life out as the bass player for Manhattan Transfer. So he and I have as much, if not more, of a connection through our music interests and work. Um, yeah, I mean, so we're more frequently talking about, hey man, did you see that YouTube video of Keith Richards doing the waiting for the man? It's that kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
More than, hey, did you see the latest episode of Andor? I do have another dimension
Yeah.
besides Star Wars.
Like some of the other people that we've had on here, you're that OG.
Yeah.
Back in the day, which I think is really cool. Even like you and I were talking about beforehand, was there, there's a little bit of a lull, after 83, we all thought, and then there was some talk a little bit, but I mean, most people thought, okay, that was it. Did the trilogy, Darth Vader, he's a good guy again, and Anakin's back, whatever. And then it sort of died off. People like yourself, you have to either get into different, doing some more movies or some music or things like that, because there's not that Star Wars push anymore.
Yeah.
So you have 10 or 15 years, but what I really think is cool is that you're still relevant today coming to these conventions, which is pretty cool. Now, did you have any input on either the Boba Fett lines or any DAC stuff, or was that all, okay, this is the script, here you go?
No, it was, this is the script. Let it, play it the way it is.
Right.
I can't speak for Jeremy. I think I am not sure about where the characterization of Boba Fett came from. Maybe one of your fans will come back to you, but I'll put the question out there. Jeremy always felt that the Boba Fett, what made him so powerful as a screen presence was the armor, the costume. And he used to tell the story about when he was taken out onto the set in between, shoots so George could take a look and approve the wardrobe, the costume. And he said the handlers brought him out onto the soundstage, and all the technicians were doing this, that, and the other associated with their work, tweaking a lamp here and there. Oops, sorry. And then suddenly when they saw him come on, they stopped and just were, just like, whoa, who is that? Okay. Now, beyond that, the question is, well, how did Jeremy play him? And that related to the question I asked him, because I didn't know anything about Boba Fett. The night before, I was to cover for him, and he was going off to do another film. And I said, hey, Jeremy, what's my intention here? Tell me about this character. And he says, hey, it's real simple. Just think Clint Eastwood, a fistful of dollars, play everything slow and menacing. So it was, okay, that's easy. That's a movement drill, okay? I like to think that Jeremy Bullock brought that to Boba Fett, that, okay, Boba Fett is Clint Eastwood. And I've seen, obviously in writings about Star Wars that, Boba Fett's Clint Eastwood, or, his fistful of dollars or what have you. Did George come up with that? I don't know. Irving Kershner? I don't know. Neither George nor Irving said anything to me about how to play Boba Fett that I remember on the 2 days that I did that. So what I brought to the table was what Jeremy told me the night before.
Right. So I guess, and that was my next question, how did you get that part? How did you get to, he was obviously leaving, or?
Well, I think he was on the same setup that I was on, daily rate, because there was so few scenes that Boba was in. Um, I just don't know. But in any event, as I think I told you, I was only supposed to be there for 2 days' work, and I ended up being there on a daily rate for 4 weeks, which meant that I was making a bundle of money. But some of the days I was just standing around.
Right.
I showed up, and they were really trying to slot me and the other guys that were the pilots in, when they could, just to get something on film. So you never knew if you'd be shooting or not. So what happened in Jeremy's case was he had contracted to do 2 days' work on another film. Those 2 days came up when they had scheduled the some of the sequences in and around the carbon freezing chamber. So they needed to find somebody to stand in for him, which is actually great because on two counts, this kind of tells you how George and Gary Kurtz ran the show. I mean, they had their difficulties, but they didn't want Jeremy to get all fouled up on this, and so they let him go, all right, to do this, and that's to their credit. Okay, so then they're trying to figure out, well, okay, we got to find somebody to stand in for Jeremy in these two scenes. And because I'd worked with David Tomlin, who was the first assistant, and Steve Lanning and Roy Button, second and third assistant, in another film, actually 3 films prior, so they knew me as a team player and a guy. And I was the same size as Jeremy and what have you. So I think Steve Lanning came to me and said, "Hey, John, would you stand in for Jeremy for 2 days so he can go off and do his film?" And I said, "Sure, okay." Well, to my credit, what if an actor wants to be really kind of a tool and work to rule, oh no, I got to talk to the union and my agent, and we got to renegotiate. I said, "Yeah, sure." I had no idea what it was going to be all about, which
Right.
is why the night before I asked Jeremy, what am I doing? So that's how it happened. And that to me is a really good story to tell an aspect of what it was like in this sort of family feel that was generated from the top down by Gary and George.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a story that probably doesn't get told very much, which
No,
so I think that's pretty cool. And
but
again,
there are
like you
other
said,
stories that are just like that,
oh
I
sure,
think, that will, I mean, you can read the backstage stuff of all the hassles that were going on. But there was a lot of good things that were done. And I remember my coming away as a 60s guy thinking, well, small is beautiful. When you get into big, it's kind of, all screwed up and corporate. Well, I remember the kind of line I would say to people about, well, what was Star Wars like? And I said, well, I learned that not only small is beautiful, here was this huge production, and the people weren't forgotten.
right?
You know?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And that's to the credit of George and Gary Kurtz in a big way.
Yeah, that's cool. Like you said, like it was like a family thing, but also for yourself. Like you said, you don't. I'm not going to call my agent. I'm gonna be a team player here.
Yeah,
I'll put I talked to Jeremy. Let's put the uniform on or the costume on.
yeah.
I'll do these 2 days, and we'll
Well,
keep
that
going.
was one of the things about the North American community in London. And I say North American purposefully because there were Canadians. They weren't Americans. And they let you know that. There were Canadians and Americans, and there were about 200 of us, men and women of all ages, that were there for one reason or another. It was a small community, and we were always the ones that were called upon to do these under 5 roles on these big budget American films, and there were many of them done in the 70s. It was a good time to be in London to do those. There was, the James Bond stuff and Bridge Too Far and The Eagle Has Landed and, all these things that were done. They were runaway films from Hollywood because, the tax incentives in England were such that were very inducing. um, the companies were finding that in Los Angeles in the 70s, the cost to do things on the back lots were prohibitive, and so there was a lot of work out there. Well, the fact of the matter is that as I said, with David Tomlin, I'd done 3 films with him. With Steve Lanning, I'd done 4, and these are my friends.
Right.
Yeah, they were on the other side of the camera, but I knew these people, and we drank beer together and sat around,
Right.
and I did some overseas work with them in the Netherlands and Spain, and so you weren't going home; you were at the hotel or hitting the bars, and I hung out with these guys.
Yeah. Well, and that's again, I think that's part of the family and the
Yeah,
community there
yeah.
that you were able
It was a
to
great
do that.
community, and the other thing is that there were about 5 guys who were 5 John Mortons, right? And that was the competition. But there was a fair amount of work that was going on, and so you had a 1 in 5 shot, and so you weren't necessarily competing against your buddies
Right.
because there was enough work to go around, and so yeah. But when I got to New York, and was trying to set up there after England. I think I told you about the time I had in L.A. There were 300 John Mortons.
Right.
So the odds weren't so good, and so you didn't have a sense of community in New York trying to break in. I
Right.
mean, obviously those guys who were working off Broadway and off Broadway and had maybe trained at Juilliard or NYU, yeah, I mean, they had that sort of network that was all working for them. We had that in London. It was a great experience. The 70s in London was fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's neat that you have these stories that you can still tell in reference to Star Wars.
Yeah.
And then we talked a little bit about some of the new stuff. Tell me about some of the new stuff that you said Rebels and Mandalorian, things like that. What is your thoughts on those?
Well, when they first started putting the Rebels together, it was pretty clear that the what was called the Star Wars timeline was driving the bus on how they were trying to fill in the blanks. And this gets back to what Leland Chee and Pablo Hidalgo were doing. Saying, okay, we've got this timeline, and Rebels was right in there. Before. Let's see, where was it? Before it was before the Battle of Yavin, so it was, 3 or 4 years before. So it was kind of piecing together that period. And I think there was a notion that there were going to be, some of the characters that we would later see, like Chewbacca and maybe Hamill and some of the Rebel pilots, which didn't actually happen. But all of that was, well, what I remember. But all of that was sort of in there. And so what was happening, at least at that stage, was the idea that you were just going to fill in the blanks on the timeline to connect all this stuff together, which I think was a pretty good idea. Now I cannot tell you how the thinking of the Mandalorian came about, but what I think makes the Mandalorian very interesting is when they sort of went beyond CGI into the new technologies and the sets, the virtual sets are just amazing.
Yeah.
Very inspired, and I think that's visually what excited me and my wife is that this is Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, for me, the sequels, were they my favorite movies? No, but the cinematography,
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff, the Easter eggs, where they go back and you see some of these ships that are destroyed,
Yeah,
from the Battle of Yavin
yeah,
or things like that,
yeah.
or you see the Death Star with the Emperor's chair that's just destroyed, things like that, where it brings me
Yeah.
back to those OG movies,
Yeah, yeah.
which I really enjoyed. So that was fun for me. The stories, they're the stories.
Yeah,
It is
yeah,
what it is.
yeah.
But those things were the ones that kept me involved in this new stuff. Especially with the sequels. Was there anything that you did with Boba Fett or Dak that didn't make it?
No,
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 everything
no.
that
Yeah,
they used
yeah,
for you was in the movies.
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, it was it was pretty constrained. It was the scene with Boba Fett and Vader. It was just one corridor. In the case of Dak, you were in the Battle of Hoth, and it was all shot pretty much in the cockpit of the snowspeeder. Um, there was one scene that Billy D and I were getting set up for on the second day that I was doing this, and I don't know exactly what that was, but that wasn't used.
Yeah, because where would you have been with Billy D? What?
We were in the freezing chamber.
Oh, okay. So you were still in that Boba Fett
Yeah,
outfit.
yeah.
Okay.
And they were having some technical issues, and I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it had to do with the steam and what have you that was there. But something wasn't working. But it must have been close, and this is what has always perplexed me. But I don't recall that Han Solo or Darth Vader or Chewbacca were there. It was just the two of us. And what's so perplexing about it is they wouldn't have had us there to do all this stuff, and it was really for a whole afternoon while they were trying to get this thing. If they were just setting up the shot, they would have had stand-ins. That was not used. The next day, Jeremy came back. I don't know whether that was they decided not to have that scene because it was nothing happened and they decided to not even shoot it. But it was a great time for me and Billy D. I mean,
Yeah.
I got to hang with him, just standing around.
Yeah. That's pretty neat. Did you know when you had the Dak part? Did you know that it was going to be this little scene and you're going to end up getting
No,
mushed?
no. In fact, yeah, my contract wrote Rebel Pilot, and I remember coming in on the first day, and I guess it was Steve Lanning, and I said, "Hey, Steve, this is great, man. So who am I?" And Steve said, "Well, you're Dak. Well, who's Dak? And well, he's Luke Skywalker's co-pilot. Oh man, that's great. Everybody will remember who he is. Well, not so fast, John. You're already dead." So yeah, I mean, and then you just handed the sides, and there you are.
You knew sort of what was going on, but then you like we were talking about earlier, you were able to be there and do the Boba Fett thing. Just like Jeremy, was the Imperial
Yeah,
lieutenant or whatever,
yeah,
at the
yeah,
time. And there's so many stories about other people like yourself that, like you said, hey, we're going to do this, or I need you to put this costume on and stand over here,
yeah.
or
Well,
different
Treat
things.
Williams being one example. I
Hmm.
remember Treat being there. He was friends of Carrie's and Harrison's, and he just came to visit them. He was doing something in London, and just to see what was going on, he said, "Hey, this is really great. I wish I was a part of this." And somebody said, "Well, you want to be?" And he said, "Yeah." So he came back the next day, and they put a uniform on him, and he got to be an extra in Empire Strikes Back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
of course, nowadays, everybody wants to be an extra in Star Wars. So you have instances where stars or I think I read somewhere where one of the royals came in and played a stormtrooper, Harry or William.
Yeah. Well, Daniel Craig did.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He played one that was with Ray.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is cool because again, like we go back to how big Star Wars is. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the biggest actors
Everybody wants to be
wants to be
wants to be a part of it.
a part of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
But there was Treat. I remember he was just so excited. He thought that was really neat.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Come back tomorrow. We'll put you in a costume.
yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So, is there a specific movie in the Star Wars universe? Have you seen all of them?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And is would Empire be
Oh
your
yeah,
favorite? You
yeah,
think?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Although I have to say I liked The Force Awakens. I thought there was a
Hmm.
lot of really great potential in that. Yeah, that very much inspired me in some ways. So I think those two. Visually, certainly Phantom Menace. There was interesting stuff in there, but the pacing for that and the others in the prequels didn't really work for me. Um, but I wanted to say something about responding to something you said
Please.
several minutes ago. George always felt, and I remember him saying at one of the conventions um, that everybody's Star Wars um, results from how they first entered, the brand, and so the real Star Wars. For those of us who were children in the 70s, were, the original trilogy, Star Wars.
Yeah.
But for a kid that came to Star Wars through the Clone Wars, well, that's the real Star Wars. And so I think, yeah, that would apply to The Mandalorian or what have you. If you were 10 and the first thing that you got to see was The Mandalorian or Star Wars Rebels or, whatever, then all the rest kind of relates to that
Hmm.
because your brain, the first image, it's like having your first drink. It's like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. What is it? Budweiser. Oh, cool. You know,
Yeah.
uh, and I think George is very, that's very prescient.
Oh, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
we had a gentleman on here. So my co-host is 27, 28. So he's a prequels kid.
Yeah.
And then we had another gentleman on that he works with that really never watched them. So we had a whole episode about, do you watch it chronologically? Do you watch it by release date? Different things
Yeah.
like that. He's in his 30s, I think, just hadn't got into Star Wars but
Yeah.
wanted to.
Yeah.
So we had him on and we talked about that. And I think that's a perfect example,
Yeah.
for George to say that for, how you get introduced to that, is how
And it
that
would apply to
fandom.
comics
Absolutely.
and the extended universe.
The novels that Jim
Yeah.
writes and
That's the other thing when you were saying about that sort of dead space. Yeah, that's one of the wonderful things that Tim Zahn did for everybody is
Mhm.
that kept Star Wars going, with his original trilogy there, the Thrawn trilogy, and it kept it alive. Um, what the other thing, which I don't know how significant it is, but is the role playing games. And that's how Pablo Hidalgo got into this. Um, when I came back to the States, that first Christmas when I was here in 1980, Dungeons and Dragons, hit the scene,
Yeah.
and that really took over the imaginations of a lot of kids who were in their, junior high school, middle school years. And there was an outfit in eastern Pennsylvania, Honesville, called West End Games. And West End Games got, on the basis of, I think, Dungeons and Dragons, got the relationship with Lucas and Lucasfilm to create the backstories to support the role playing games. Now, when I got involved in Star Wars again with the conventions, um, they Lucasfilm found out that I was a writer and I was doing a lot of writing, particularly military stuff. They had this idea that I would write some books maybe or articles, and West End Games had a quarterly that came out with fan fiction, and so I learned a whole uh, you know subset of Star Wars and how it all worked. Got to meet Tim Zahn and Mike Stackpole, and went up to Huntsville, and they gave me all of these role playing books. And what essentially the role playing books were, was to inform you if you were going to be role playing. And lo and behold, there was this backstory of Dak. So you were asking about Ralta. When Dak was Dak in the script was spelt Dack, but in the credit it's Dak.
Right.
So there was all of that folderol as to how do you spell his name. But the other thing is that in the role playing books it had Dak, Dack, Ralta, Ralter. So he suddenly had a last name, and there was this 800-word biography of who he
Right.
was. He came from a planet called Callist. It wasn't Pablo who wrote that, but it was somebody that was a friend of Pablo's. I want to say his name was, I think his last name was Stein.
Oh, okay.
Might be a relative. What was his first name? Paul? Could be. And because I asked Pablo, I said, well, "Did you write my backstory?" And he said, "No. I think it was Paul Stein. Don't quote me on that." But anyway, so the purpose of all of those role playing games was to give backstories, so that if somebody wanted to play Dak or Wedge or, Jansen, any of those pilots. But then at the same time, with the role playing games, you had to have quantification of skill sets,
Right.
and weapons and vehicles and things. So they had all these books on the various vehicles and what their capabilities were and all. It was a huge operation, but that was the basic building material for all of these stories, that the fan fiction that came out of that was published in their quarterly. So, how that was what the basis for all of that. And I remember going to a convention of the Star Ladies, and a lot of them were writers and writing for, and Steve Sansweet was there writing for this publication. So there was a lot of fan fiction that was out there in the late 90s, inspired very much by Mike Stackpole and Tim Zahn. Anyway, so that was there to kind of, enhance a fan experience before, Star Wars 1, Phantom Menace came out, which I think is quite interesting. So that all of that was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right with the books and the games. It keeps everything relative.
Yeah.
And then again, when Clone Wars came out and Rebels, they dive in a little bit more and give you a little bit more backstory on some of these characters, which I think is really neat and has kept everybody involved in Star Wars, but it's also brought new fans there because
Yeah.
as these kids get, come and watch these cartoons or animation, as the adults like to say, because these kids come in and watch this and it's like, oh, this is cool. And now we can go over here and watch this movie.
Yeah.
And we can watch these. Oh, and there's more movies and there's more, and there's games.
Yeah.
And there's
yeah.
books, which is crazy. It's just become such a huge.
Yeah, in the 90s there was this one, the collectible Star Wars collectible card games that was it was a Norfolk, Virginia outfit. Really beautiful playing cards, that had those values. And it was sort of, I watched how this was being played in those days. They were great cards. I signed a lot of them, sort of like dominoes.
Right.
And people were collecting those. But yeah, I mean, there was a whole host of things that somebody could get into,
Yeah.
In addition to the role-playing games. And I don't know how extensive that was. It must have been, but I never ran into anybody that was a Star Wars role player. But that was sort of like the equivalent of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Well, it's like for myself, I don't play the games that are out now,
Mm-hmm.
but for me, it's cool. I can go on YouTube and somebody's put, the whole thing on there so I can watch it almost like
Mm-hmm.
a movie instead of playing or spending 24, 30, or 80 hours trying to play this game or
Yeah.
win this game over. There's still a cool story in there
Yeah.
as well, and I don't have to
Well, then
get
there's
into
the other
that.
thing, of course, that they had Nintendo.
Yeah.
And what I did discover was that the Nintendo stuff, Dak was a really prominent character there. He was, he flew X-Wings in Nintendo.
Right.
He was a good hotshot pilot. Well, I remember, somewhere along the line, a kid come up and say, "Hey, let's play Nintendo. Can we do?" He had, and I said, "I don't think you want me to do that."
And that goes back to, what we started with, that Dak was just this, little spot,
Mm-hmm.
has grown into got a quote, a huge quote,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
also a cool backstory as well, in being a pilot, which
Yeah.
I think is neat for you to continue the Star Wars experience as we all get older.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was the origin of Pablo Hidalgo.
Yeah.
I think his years at West End were probably around that time in the late '90s, and I don't know exactly when he moved over to Lucasfilm.
Yeah, he's been doing those encyclopedias for
Yeah.
forever, which is great.
And then Leland Chee was what did they call him? The Holocron.
Oh,
His
okay, yeah.
partner. Yeah, he could send an email to Leland and say, what, how does this work? And he'd come back with something.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Those guys were pretty interesting guys.
Oh, and the knowledge they have is crazy.
Well, yeah. I mean, but they were fans like you. I
Yep.
mean, but their thing was the knowledge was the stories themselves, whereas what you've got is collectibles. But you have the knowledge, from all of that.
Yeah.
Have you met Steve Sansweet?
I haven't. I've gone through his collection when he
Yeah.
brings it to Celebration. I've gone through it. I
Yeah.
haven't really sat down
Great guy.
and
Great
talked to
guy.
him.
Yeah,
I've
really
heard
great guy.
I've heard good things about
Yeah.
him, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, he knows everything about collectibles. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the neat thing with my co-host Nick. He's big into the lore as
Mhm.
well. I mean, I've read a bunch of the books. I think I have all of them, but I haven't read as many as he has. So that's sort of neat that we can sort of play
Yeah.
off each other, where he knows a lot of that lore.
Yeah.
Into these novelizations, which is great. So we're able to, do that and play off each other
Mhm.
when we do some of these things.
Then, of course, there's the other aspects of Star Wars, the costume clubs.
Oh, the
You know,
cosplay! It's crazy.
Yeah, you've got the 501st,
Yep.
the Rebel Legion, and the Mandalorian Mercs, all of which I've got an honorary membership and support. If they're any of them going to be here
Yeah.
this week, I'll do a Blaster Trooper or whatever and contribute to whatever they're supporting. Mainly it's a lot of Make-A-Wish stuff.
Yes.
Which is a great charity.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
it's fantastic.
But they do good work.
Yeah, and the costumes are they could be on set.
Yeah. No, it's a whole ethos there that
Yeah.
you
Well, that's Chris Bartlett that's been on here before. He's done some stuff in The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, but he started out as a cosplay,
Mm-hmm.
and just designing his costumes, and,
Yeah.
and was able to, either got recognized or whatever, and then, has
Yeah.
been able to play several of these different characters in costume that he has made,
Yeah.
which is really cool. So.
Yeah. It's an amazing world.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time to come
Okay.
down here, for the day and chat Star Wars with us. And,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
have a
man.
good time this weekend and
Yeah. Transplanted Marylander here
Yeah.
in
in Nashville.
Do you miss the crabs?
I do. We don't have great seafood here, as I'm sure you probably can
Yeah.
tell. But there's some good restaurants here as Nashville begins to grow. But
Yeah.
the you can't get crabs like we do in Maryland.
Oh no.
That's for sure.
Well,
That's for
thank you
sure.
very much, Ron. It was great,
Absolutely.
and,
So
may the force be with you, buddy.
may the force be with you. John Morton, our special guest today,
Yeah.
Dak, Boba Fett. Thank you so much for taking the time.
All right, bud.
We are finished up with this episode. Please hit the like button, subscribe, check out Star Wars Jedi Chat. And until then, may the force be with you, and we'll see you on the next Star Wars Jedi Chat. Thanks, John.
All right. Take care, guys.